another episode of Romance Unleashed. I'm Mel, and today I have Taj McCoy in the house, and we're very excited to have her because we're going to talk about all the things that we probably shouldn't talk about on the podcast. Yay! Hi, Taj.
That makes for the best episodes.
I know.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited you're here.
I'm excited to be here.
So, for those who don't know who you are, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. So, again, I'm Taj McCoy. I'm from Oakland, California. I live just outside of Washington, D.C. I am a romance author, a literary agent, a higher ed consultant, sometimes a private chef, a busybody, basically, but also a tumbleweed. And so I have been...
I feel like you should put that on a shirt. Busybody and a tumbleweed.
I mean, honestly, yeah. Because to me, I'm like, wherever something takes me, that's where I'll go. I don't feel like I'm completely rooted yet.
I love that.
And so, I just kind of go where the wind takes me. But for me, I started my romance author journey a long time ago. I attempted my first novels in law school, and my first novel was published in 2022. It's Savvy Sheldon Feels Good as Hell, and that was followed by Zora Books Are Happy Ever After, and then the anthology Even If the Sky is Falling. And this year, All the Good Ones Are Taken came out, and I said my own title wrong. The Good Ones Are Taken.
But really, all the good ones are
Honestly,
taken.
that was
so
probably
yeah.
my mindset.
Yeah.
All the good ones feel like they're taken because dating it's real ghetto.
A shit show.
Yeah.
So, you write books where the female main characters are like unapologetically themselves within like their bodies, their minds. Why was it so important for you to write storylines like that?
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's funny because they all really own who they are. But I also want to be able to show that they have vulnerable sides that, can be shaken given the right circumstances. To me, like, I feel like I wanted to write people that I could relate to. And it's taken me a long time to really own who I am in this body.
Yeah.
And given all of the things that I deal with. And I wanted for others who may feel the same, understanding that not everybody does, to have like books that they can come back to that just not only bring them joy, but also like help them feel seen.
Yeah.
Like for me, Savvy is my one who questions herself more than the others. But that was me. And I have gotten flack for it at times because, there are folks that are like, well, we want to see the unapologetically, but
Right.
it's a journey to get there.
Absolutely.
And so to me, like, it's necessary to kind of show that evolution,
Yeah.
right? And so the book that's out now, The Good Ones Are Taken, is Savvy's best friend, Maggie. And in Savvy's story, Maggie is that constant, that bold, loud, proud person. But what people will see in this story is even Maggie has vulnerabilities.
I agree. I think I remember reading early reviews of Savvy, and some people had kind of that feedback of like, well, do we want to read more like when you're writing about a fat person in a romance, do we want to read more of like what we already deal with?
Right.
And personally, I thought that was unfair because I feel like the journey is so long, and how do you do yourself justice if like you just I'm sure there are people who embody themselves fully how they are from the beginning.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, it's a journey, and we have those thoughts of like, what do I look like? How does my body fit in this world? Am I good looking enough? Is the person I'm with, do I need to work out more? And like all of these thoughts. And that's what I loved about Savvy, I think, that it was so real because those thoughts are thoughts that have crossed my mind, I'm sure, as many other people. And so being able to like be like, fuck, I'm not alone in that, I thought was really important.
Well, and that's what I was aiming for. And, the hard part is, right, there are folks that are reading because they want that escape from reality completely. Right. But they're never going to get that in my stories. And so for those that are like, I don't want anything to feel like reality, just don't read my books because you'll have ones where, like you're seeing, kind of the fallibility of people. You have ones where you're seeing, the sex isn't always good.
Right.
You have you know, like those very real moments, but you know, I'm a real ass chick.
Yeah.
And so like I want people, the way I would talk to people, the way I would share with people, I want them to be able to feel that in my writing too.
I love that. I dated ish a guy who was a lot like the shitty boyfriend in Savi.
Jason, yeah. I've dated several Jasons.
And we fucking hate Jasons.
Yes.
And he's a personal trainer. And I remember a lot of the dialogue between us was like, I can't pursue a serious relationship with you because like I need to know that you're gonna move your body type thing.
Yeah.
And for me it was like really hard to hear those things because while I've always been a little bigger than probably people in my friend group, I have not been the size I am to post-pandemic. And so for a long time being able to love my body as it is, and figure out, because there was a time during the pandemic when there was like, no, I was not moving, no, I was eating like shit, you know. And now that I am in this new space, and I remember going to the doctor and the doctor was like, your cholesterol levels are high, like you need to start moving your body, just like not even change the way you eat, I'm just telling you move your body. And so I was like, you know what, Dr. Green, fine, you're right. Like I feel it, right? Like fucking Dr. Green. Dr. Green, if you're listening to this, you have a message waiting for you on Tuesday that I need you to get to, please.
Make haste.
But you know, I had to come to terms with that. Like, yes, I am not moving my body at all. And now that I am, I go to the gym like 6 times a week. I am still the same body. You know, I just feel stronger. I feel healthier. But my body has not changed. And hearing that from a man who I thought I had a lot of feelings for was like, why am I not enough as I am? Why does there need to be conditions to, it's like, if you don't work out 5 times, like, I don't know where this relationship can go. And it's like, you know what, my guy, like, your dick isn't even that good. Please.
I mean, like, and that's the thing, right? Like, there's these levels of control that certain people will try to place on you. And I had a very similar relationship where I was dating a guy long term, and he basically was like, you know, I think you're beautiful, but you, if you're not living a lifestyle that I feel is active enough, then I don't think we can continue. And so it was this thing like looming over my head all the time.
Like these conditions.
This condition, like you're only qualify for my love if. And you know, I didn't realize how much that affected me until years after it was over. Yeah. And honestly, when I started writing Savvy, that was when I was dealing with finding the closure for that relationship in particular. But for me, like, I mean, even when I was a teen, like, I had pretty big, like, body dysmorphia issues, even when I was at my smallest. Yeah. And it's because in my family, I'm the tallest girl. I'm taller than both of my parents. I'm not taller than my stepdad, but I'm taller than my biological father. And, like, I was also, you know, my mom we used to be a gymnast, so she's, like, A cup, and I was like D immediately. Like, right. And so I was taller than her when I was in 5th grade. And so she always called me her Amazon child. And I think that did something to me. I love you, Mom. It's okay. I've dealt with it. Yeah. But it was one of those things when I was like just starting college. I was probably the smallest I'd ever been. I got sick my very first year. Everybody talks about like the freshman 15. Right. I lost 15 my freshman year because it was like everybody got mono. Long story for another day. But I was at my very smallest. I could rock a string bikini no problem, and yet I felt in my mind that I was fat. And, you know, move forward over 20 years, I am well over 100 pounds heavier than that person. And I look back at those photos and I was like, I was Delulu. Yeah. And so it was just one of those things, like, you don't realize how you're seeing yourself and how you allow the words of others to affect, you know, your own image of yourself. And it's been a true journey. Like it's taken me decades to get to a point where, you know, I love me as I am, and, you know, it's ever changing, but at the same time, like, I'm good.
Right.
But for Savvy, it took her a month and it still pissed people off.
Yeah. Yeah. I, similar to you, like, I've looked back at pictures when I thought I was, like, I remember as early as, I don't know, like 14, 15, like going on a diet because I thought I was fat. And I look back at those pictures that I'm like, baby.
Yeah.
But I think also a lot of that comes from, like you said, right? Like the words that people are speaking to you. And again, same as you. I love you, Mom, but we're in therapy for a reason, girl. And, you know, I feel like in minority households, this is a big topic. Like
100%.
your weight is like the first thing that gets commented on. And I eventually had to put my foot down and tell my mom, like, stop, do not mention my weight to me again. Like, and that was really hard because for like, I've just been taking it and taking it and taking it. And it's like, why? And it's now to the point where, like, I also correct her when she's describing people. She's like, oh, you know, Maria from blah, 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 the skinny one. And I'm like, why?
Right.
Why is that
Right.
so important? And like my whole family's like that. And I think that all of that really catches up to us at some point or another. And to your point about how those things affect you, like I met someone on Hinge that was also a personal trainer, and automatically my like guards were up because I was like, what are you gonna say now about my body? Like what is the problem now?
I'm always wary of the personal trainers. There's nothing against them. It's
Right.
just based on certain experiences. Like there's some, I follow tons of people because I love to, I archive, I save tons of reels on Instagram with like different workouts and things that I want to try. And because I follow so many different trainers, every once in a while I'll have some male trainer in my DMs, like halfway hitting on me, halfway like, I can help you get to your,
right.
If you don't get out of here with that, sir, I am not interested.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those like you can't possibly like have a full picture, think someone's completely attractive unless they fit this mold.
Right.
And that drives me crazy. And I do think, you know, to your point, a lot of times it can have like a cultural origin. And it's also like just so hurtful because it's like your own family, you know, like they poke and they tease and in their mind they're showing love. Yeah. But at the same time, like inside you're just wanting to scream.
Yeah.
It's, oh God, that's such a thing.
I know.
But you know, God, so I went to a wedding in India. And I mean, it was a 4-day wedding, gorgeous affair in Bangalore. And one of the days we decided to go shopping all together. And so we're looking at lehenga, we're looking at saris and all the things. And I was admiring one of them. And the shop owner was like, you can't fit that. We don't make that in your size. And the shame that I felt and the embarrassment because it was in front of everybody that we were with was just so heavy. And I was just like, I mean, first of all, sir, you didn't have to call me out like that. I didn't ask. But like, I was like, okay, well, I'll just get a sari because it's yards of fabric. I know I can fit that. But it was kind of one of those moments where you're like, around the world, like people can just hate you because of your size and not care what your journey has been, not care that you're not necessarily at your biggest at that moment, or care that you've been putting work into how you take care of yourself. There's no grace given.
Well, and there's, I feel like, a societal misconception that because you are fat, you are not healthy,
Yes.
which is like a whole other thing. I was recently in Peru, and the family portion of it, like we had someone who came from another city to come see me, and she was like, "You've always been gordita," and I was like, bitch, why? And so my cousin, who like knows that I'm at this point of my life, I'm like no filter, she was like, okay, you don't say those things anymore. She's like, oh, I'm saying it with love. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't understand how those comments my whole life have affected me, right?
I can put my hands on you with love.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, if you really wanted to go there, like, let's do this. Okay?
And then to the sizing effect of all of this, like I was doing merchandising for Simulit, and they don't make past an XL. And so they were like, you have to send us molds of what you want your above XLs to look like, because we don't make that here. Like, we don't have that. And I remember even when we were shopping for like different things, I forgot PJs, and my nanny was like, what? Let's go in there. And I was like, they're not going to have my size. Like, I know they're not going to have my size, because they're extra large is probably a large over there, you know? So like,
I used to avoid mainstream stores because, you know, for the longest, many of them didn't go past a 12 or a 14.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, you know, I don't want to be up in this store looking at the headbands.
Right.
Like, why am I here?
Right.
You know, and it's nice to see that some of them have decided to expand. But even then, like, for those stores where they weren't necessarily true to size to begin with,
right,
their plus size is still too small.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's difficult to find the spaces where you feel like your body is celebrated, and accepted, and that people see that you don't just want to be in the frumpy, floral, weird, ruffly thing.
Right.
You know exactly what I'm talking about. And so it's just one of those things where it's just like, okay, like, we can look so good. And that's one of the things that I love about what's happening right now with pollen, because, you know, Nicola is getting all of this wonderful treatment, and they're showing that the curvy girls can come with it and deliver.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, I'm hoping, you know, like, we were hoping with Lizzo that we were going to see, like, this huge change. And I think we started to see people take more pride in owning who they were, but we weren't seeing the labels follow necessarily. Yeah. And now we may. Yeah. It's unfortunate that it couldn't happen for a woman of color.
I was about to say that.
But that's another conversation for another day. Right.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I agree. I think it's wonderful. I think it was also really hard, I think, reading some of like the feedback Lisa was getting in like how proud she was of her body and how unashamed she was of her body.
Yeah. The comments were awful.
It was terrible. Yeah. And like reading all of that as someone who has maybe not felt fit in that traditional mold was like, what happens when I do? Yes. Like, and I feel like recently I've kind of come, like before I remember going to the beach and I'm like, I could never wear a thong bikini. Like, absolutely not. Like, these roles were not doing it. And now I'm like, fuck it. Yeah. Like, but again, right, like I'm 33. It's taken a whole 33 years of my life to get here and like be able to embrace that. And I think
proud of you.
Thank you.
I'm not there yet.
Also, my ass pictures look great.
Okay, my Asian side is on my back side, and so we're not ready for the thongs. Okay, we're working on it though. We in the gym.
Okay, yeah. You know, just squat it out.
Literally squatting for our life.
Actually, there's this really great glutes program by Jesse's Girl.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll talk after. But it's sensational.
Yeah, it's sensational.
But I guess to say all of that, I think that your books do a really great job in celebrating people as they are. And I think it's something that we also need to take. I lost my train of thought there. Anyway.
But you said something that triggered something for me, because Savvy's original title was Just As You Are. and I was told it was too basic. And we went through 96 titles to get to Savvy
fucking
Sheldon Feels
hell. So
Publishing. Good times.
Publishing onto that. What's the intersection like of being an author and being an agent?
It's illuminating in a lot of ways. As a literary agent, I get to be in on the conversations that I couldn't be in as an author, but all of the things that I've experienced as an author help to inform how I advocate on behalf of my clients, and how I help to set their expectations, because I would say the vast majority of my list are BIPOC authors.
Love it.
Authors and illustrators. And so I am very cognizant of sometimes I'll say unintentional. I can't always say that it is, but I'm going to give people the benefit of the doubt and say unintentional bias that we can often receive from different people within the industry, different events, different coordinators, different publishers and imprints, because the representation isn't necessarily as strong at some of these places. They don't necessarily know how to market our books differently. They think that everything should be marketed the same, when the audience isn't necessarily the same.
Right.
And so it can be really tough at times to navigate, but also, if you are an author and you're speaking up, you're scared almost to do that, because there's this worry that you're going to be seen as problematic.
Yeah.
And then people won't want to publish you anymore.
Yeah.
And so, like, having an agent that is a strong ally and advocate, who understands the ins and outs of what some of us deal with, and how certain things that are done are just unacceptable and you have to speak on it. Having people willing to do that it can be hard to find. I have friends who have agents who won't speak up because they're like, let's let them see, like, let's let them navigate this. They're in a new space, and it's like, that's cool and all, but this is also my livelihood. It's my career. It's my reputation. In what ways are they actually protecting me? And so, as an agent, part of my job is to make sure that my authors and my illustrators are protected.
I love that. I definitely think it's hard to find people in the industry that are willing to put their money where their mouth is, right? I think we've seen it a lot over with what's happening with St. Martin's Press.
Yeah.
And, it's I think it's a hard thing, because while the marketing boycott was not aimed to hurt authors, because St. Martin's Press has been quiet for so long, it is now hurting authors. And I think it is hurting specifically BIPOC authors, who we knew it was going to hurt the most anyway.
Yeah.
And that's where I feel like this is where your allyship comes in, right? And so, like, what are white authors who are part of these imprints doing? And I get it's your livelihood, but that's part of allyship, right? And so, like, how do you bridge that gap of being an ally and being like, you are my publisher, when are you going to speak up about they're asking for nothing. They're asking for nothing. And it's been really interesting to see in that space. I am also somebody who ruffles some feathers sometimes, and we were asked to do an event here for an author. It was a Wednesday title, and I responded and said, hey, we're not opposed to it, however, we are part of the boycott, and we will not be marketing the book. So we could market the author, we could say they're having an event here, but we will not be marketing the book. And it took a few days for him to reply, and they were like, thank you for, what, she's just not going to do anything for it, which is bullshit, because she is just at a different bookstore locally. And I think from there, we've put in a couple other requests, and they've kind of, and I'm like, it is what it is. If that's what I have to do to make sure that the people who are not being spoken up for are, then that's what we're gonna do. But it is tough because, you know, as a indie bookstore, you are losing out on hosting an event, on money that's coming in for that, et cetera, et cetera. But again, right, like, where does your allyship lie?
Right. And at the end of the day, you know, we've seen a lot of protests and things happening kind of all across the country. We've seen some of the blowback from universities, from, you know, different, you know, jurisdictions that are trying to create more barriers to people really actually being able to exercise their voices. And, you know, like, you think back on, like, the civil rights movement, and people were risking their lives to try to be allies, to try to move the needle forward so that people had more equal treatment. And now we're seeing those movements happening again, but there's these new caveats and new limitations and new attempts at silencing or humbling or, you know, putting people in their place so that we can all move forward with this one agenda. And it's sad because I think that there's this very large group of people who, they're like, oh, well, what's happening is wrong, but I'm not going to speak on it because I don't want the blowback. Yep. And it's difficult, and it's also disappointing because it really is that whole scenario of, until it touches you directly, you're not going to do anything about it. But all that's happening right now, it really does touch everybody, and they just don't see it yet. Yeah. I know. We have like 6 topics that we could talk about here. This is, I mean, but it's so true. Like, you know, with publishing, it feels a lot of times like, you know, they've built a structure, and now anything that they do has to fit within that. And if it doesn't, they're uncomfortable. And if they're uncomfortable, they don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And so even when it comes to signing, you know, like, diverse authors, when it comes to, you know, trying different types of marketing, I mean, right now we're relying on people to have a giant platform on TikTok because we don't want to do the marketing ourselves.
Which is
like,
wild.
It's fascinating that it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and yet the author, whom they're paying a fraction
for their art, that is going to make them
now
the
also
money,
has to find a way to become viral on TikTok. And if they can't, and they're a mid-lister, you know, does that mean that they're no longer going to continue to accept their options?
Yeah.
Are they going to let them go?
Right.
It feels like we're seeing a lot of people phased out right now.
Yeah.
And, you know, right now, because it's, you know, folks that, you know, maybe were signed the year George Floyd was killed, you know, we're seeing some of those folks who had these great deals and have had books come out that seemed like they were successful. We're finding that some of them are struggling to get their next contract.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, you know, that effort to sign BIPOC authors in 2020 has now dissipated.
Yeah.
And so it's a really interesting time to be in publishing. There's a lot of really weird moving parts right now.
Yeah, I think that the pressure of having a platform already in order to get a book deal is wild.
Yeah.
I think that it loses what is so special about books and about art. And again, right, like, having a platform is a whole other ballgame that comes with a lot of hours put in. It comes with money sometimes, depending on how you're handling your social medias and who's handling them for you. And the truth is that a lot of BIPOC authors, it's not their full-time job, right? Like, very little, it's their full-time job. So now you're talking about adding a whole other job to them just in order to be able to get a publishing deal, because you can't put marketing dollars in your fucking department.
That's right. That's right.
Come on.
It's fascinating, and it's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, and it's almost like taboo to ask. Well, what is in my marketing budget? What can you cover? because I'm out here making bookmarks and stickers and trying to figure out in what ways I can make swag that is appealing but also doesn't, kill my budget.
Right.
If I have one.
Right.
And where is this going to come from up front, especially if we happen to be writing in romance, where we know advances tend to be smaller than in some of the other genres,
right.
even though romance is what carries the industry. So in what ways are we really trying to set this industry up for success? Are we actually investing in authors?
No. Right. No. And I think that that's so frustrating. When I think Steamlet has built a really great community with authors in which they can be very transparent and truthful with us, which is helpful for what we do to see how and why we're creating change. But some of that is so infuriating because it's like, on one side, you want to just like spill it all out. And on another side, you are like, how do I work this to still be able to support the authors that we're supporting? And I think a lot of people have to play in those lines of like, how far do I take this before, it starts to affect. And anyway, publishing, I think specifically for BIPOC, it's very frustrating and it's challenging. And I really hope that there's change that we see within the industry because, again, right, I think we went through an uprising when George Floyd was murdered, a lot of performative activism, and now we're kind of in this space where like, well, there's no uproars right now, so the Black and brown people must be okay.
Right. And it's like, no.
Right.
What do you even mean? You know, like it's not like what we were seeing in 2020 isn't still happening this year. We just saw a gentleman from the Air Force killed in his own home.
Yep.
And so what are we even talking about that things are past?
Right.
We're not past
No,
it.
at all.
And it's frustrating to try to feel like you're doing something to increase representation, to open doors and hold them open behind you, to make sure that you're helping people to feel seen and heard, but also to feel like you can be protected in your own home. Like you can't carry it all on your own. We need to do it together. And if we can't do that, we're going to have a really hard time being successful.
Yeah, I love that you said open the door and keep it open behind you, because I think sometimes there are people within our own communities that sometimes the door gets open, but they forgot how to keep that door ajar for the people who come after them. And I feel like if you're listening to this and you are an author who feels like you're in that space, I think you really need to sit with that. And I think that's anyone in the industry, right? Like, I think you really need to sit with that and what can you do? Because at some point that was also you. And if it wasn't sometimes because you wrote white characters, right? That open would have not been open in the first place. And I feel like there's a lot of conversation right now happening about hatred in that sense of like we don't really fuck with this person because they're not writing BIPOC characters. And while I feel that, I feel like there's also a lot of unfairness in that because for a lot of people, they couldn't sell their books unless their books were with white characters or they changed it to white characters.
I mean, we just saw The Idea of You just came out, written by a Black woman.
Right.
And yet Anne Hathaway is, the main character. And
don't get me started on The Idea of You because I hated every minute of it.
Yeah, that's another conversation as well. But it's one of those things where you do see, like, people are like, oh, well, it's not something that we can sell if it's BIPOC because not enough people will relate to it, which is bullshit, right? But they're like, okay, well, if we put, these white folks at the front, then everybody will be into it. Yeah. And the thing about that is, whether it's publishing or whether that's the entertainment industry as a whole, we have had to see ourselves in these other books forever. Now people are upset that they have to try to do the same. Right. And it's fascinating how frequently people ask me, you know, like, do you feel like you have to erase culture or anything from your stories? And I'm like, absolutely not. Listen, I was reading Sweet Valley High pretending in my mind like these were two black girls.
Yeah.
And they were just Valley girls, and so that excused some of how they spoke to each other. But, like, in my mind, I was like, every single book that I've read, if I was going to try to picture myself in it, there were dynamics about it that as I was reading it, I had to change for myself.
Yeah.
Now, as white people reading authors of color, you know, like, for a moment, put yourself in those shoes.
Mm.
They may not be comfortable all the time, but it wasn't comfortable for me either.
Right.
And I'm still here.
Right.
I lived.
Right.
You know, this is about, you know, romance is about joy in whatever space it's in.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't have to be about you. But at the same time, it can help you gain connection to communities that maybe you haven't been super connected to before.
Mm-hmm.
It might help you learn something about people around the world. And none of those things are bad. If you want to live in a vacuum, then just stay in your vacuum. You know?
Yeah.
It is what it is.
I agree.
But, you know, like, I love walking around this bookstore in particular and seeing, I mean, so many of our book friends here, but how much diversity there is in this room. It makes me really proud because there have been, we were talking about it yesterday, you know, 20, 30 years ago, you'd go into a bookstore and, you know, authors of color were all in the same little space.
Right.
All the genres mixed together.
Right.
You couldn't go to the romance section and find authors of color.
Yeah.
They'd be off in the back somewhere on like one bookcase.
Yeah.
And it's really something to look around here and see so many of us represented and know from our own experiences, like, how hard our friends are pushing to get their stories out there and to get them to the people who need to feel seen and understood.
Yeah, and that's obviously intentional and it's a choice, right? And I remember when I first started my Steamy Lit journey, I walked into a Barnes and Noble in San Diego, and like the romance section was like not great, but also it was very white. And I remember specifically going in there to look for Kennedy Ryan, and Barnes and Noble was like, well, we can order it for you. And I was like, no, like, I wanted it here already. I think that experience set forth a lot of what I did and the intentionality behind it, because why is Kennedy Ryan not on your shelf? Right. Like, and why are all of these authors white? And that's kind of when something triggered of like, marketing dollars. Who are you putting your marketing dollars behind? Yes. And why? And I remember when reaching out to some people about the store, somebody asked me like, you know, will you be kind of like selling space on like what books you're putting where? And I was like, no, I'm not doing that. Yeah. Like, the people who are here are people because we want them here. And I wanted the store to be what I couldn't find at all those other stores, whether you were BIPOC, you were indie. But it also takes opportunity away, right? Because we say no to a lot of things because it doesn't match with what we're trying to do. Or if we say yes, we are very intentional about what BIPOC author will you pair with this author so that that person has a platform, because that's what we're trying to do. And someone asked me this the other day in an interview, and they were like, what can you tell, you know, people who are trying to be more intentional? And I was like, intentionality is not enough. You need to follow through with action afterwards. And there are choices that you're going to have to make that are maybe not going to benefit you monetarily, but that's what's backing your intention.
You have to set boundaries sometimes. And it can be uncomfortable because in setting those boundaries, it can mean that certain opportunities are lost. But those opportunities, if they are blocked by your boundaries, they weren't meant for you anyway. And I think a lot of people go on that whole, like, what if? Right. Maybe I should have been open to that. Well, you know, maybe you should sell your soul. How about that? It's the same thing. Yeah. Put the boundary there and stick by it. Yeah,
I remember my accountant on our first year of Steamy Lit was like, like your business isn't going anywhere if you continue to donate money the way you are, because we would donate 5% and we still do of each box. And sometimes when we do special editions, I try to donate to different things. And I was like, well, I'm only doing this so I can donate. So like if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It wasn't meant for me. But like if I'm not actively creating change, I don't want it. And I think that's where sometimes the messaging gets lost, right? Like where we get stuck sometimes on just growth without intention, or just growth because the opportunity is there. But I think if you know what you are standing up for, and your boundaries are there, no one can shake you from that. And you're not always going to be perfect. You're not always going to get it right. But I think as long as you continue moving in that way, you will learn, you will grow, and you will prosper in what you've set your intentionality to do. Is there anything that you would tell anyone that is reader, author, publishing professional about what they can do to be better allies?
I think, oh gosh, on the reader front, I love what some of our faves are doing, in terms of, trying to push the needle forward and really saying, what we're going to make these commitments to, actually sit down and read authors of color and make sure that we're also putting them on our platforms. We can't have, TikTok virability, right, if people aren't actually talking about us.
Right.
And I have seen where people are like, oh yeah, I read that one, I just didn't do a video for it. Well, that doesn't help anybody.
Right.
Be loud and proud about every good romance that you read. And, talk about the things that you maybe learned that you didn't know. And share, what it's like to find joy in something that isn't what is your norm. For the authors, just keep writing, keep pushing. It's not easy to be in a creative space right now. There are too many things that feel heavy.
Yeah.
And it is easy to lean into the procrastination. I'm also speaking to myself as I say this because I actually have something I need to turn in like Tuesday. It's not happening. Sorry. But basically, just keep going. For the new writers out there, like, words on a page. Don't worry about the rest. Stop trying to re-edit the things that came before. Ugh. Just finish the damn book.
Speaking to my soul right now.
I'm one of those people too. Like literally, I will go and re-edit every single page before I add new words. Yeah. And I had to stop doing that because I was never finishing. And if you remind yourself, it's a rough draft. It's meant to not be perfect. It just needs to have an end so that I can go back and actually start to rework and revise. If I'm revising as I go, I'm never actually completing. And so for the writers, just put words on a page. Just keep going. Worry about revision later. It's a rough draft. Give yourself the grace for it to not be perfect. For publishing folks, I have had some really great conversations with editors lately who, as they're telling me what's on their wish list, a lot of them really are trying to prioritize, BIPOC stories. I hope that when you say that, you mean that you want more than one on your list. One is a token. And so if we can get to a point where we, as a whole, are recognizing that no BIPOC person, no diverse person, no marginalized person is a monolith. They cannot speak for their entire community. And every person within that community is along a spectrum. Right. Like, you have to give credence to multiple voices to have better representation. Because my representation isn't going to fit everyone within my community. And it shouldn't be expected.
Exactly. That's fantastic. Now on to the juicy things.
I was waiting for it, girl.
So, the good ones are taken. Yes. My little heart. What inspired it?
So I wanted to have a story for Maggie.
Mm-hmm.
Maggie was one of my favorite characters when I wrote Savvy because Maggie was, in my mind, what I would love to be at some point.
Mm.
To be so like colorful and in your face and unapologetic for exactly who she was, and not be concerned about anybody else's opinion.
Mm.
I haven't always been at that level, and I still like I struggle to maintain that.
Right.
Sometimes you fake it till you make it.
Right.
But for Maggie, I wanted to find a way to show that she does have this like soft ooey gooey side. And so I was like, well, let's do friends to lovers,
Mm.
and have it be a friend that you didn't get to meet in Savvy. So there's Garrett. And
Sweet baby Garrett.
I love Garrett. He's such a sweetheart. And he, there's moments in the story he calls her gorgeous. And if you ever watch My Best Friend's Wedding,
Mm-hmm.
that's what Dermot Mulroney calls Julia Roberts.
Mm.
And I took that one teeny tiny piece of inspiration, and I was like, oh, this is gonna be a friends to lovers romance, and she's gonna have another option that's almost viable, but just not quite the one,
Yeah.
right? I think so many times when we're dating, we make these lists, and do they tick the boxes, and how many do they tick, and I'm older than you, so I'm at a point where I'm like, okay, well, you don't have to tick all of them, but I need you to tick a good number, because if you have red flags, like, you're a no immediately.
Right.
But do you have any green flags? Like, what are we working with? Realizing that there's a place for compromise.
What's a green flag for you?
A green flag? I think one of the biggest green flags is good communication. Can we talk about it? Or are you going to go off and be silent and just kind of like boil over without us being able to have a conversation? Can we find a way to reconcile when we have issues? But I think that also leans into emotional intelligence, and having found on your own ways to deal with the feelings that you have.
Yeah.
Have you been to therapy? Do you have any tools that help you deal with things when you get upset? Or do you lash out? Like, in what ways can we manage these things in a healthy way that doesn't have people at each other's throats or tearing each other down, or telling people that they're not enough? Like, that's just hurtful.
Yeah.
And so in what ways can we like actually build, not just professionally or via business or anything, but even just each other? How do we help build each other up?
Yeah.
And so for Garrett, he is Maggie's biggest fan, and she is his. And so he's a sports journalist. He wants to be a broadcaster, and so he's making moves. He's in on this podcast situation, and he ultimately gets invited to like go and be on screen. But one thing that she never learned about him is he has terrible stage fright. And for her, she is a tax attorney, and she's being considered for partner. And, so when they get together, they kind of talk about, whatever's going on work-wise, but also...
And they have, like, weekly date nights.
They have weekly Saturday hangouts. And they're definitely date nights, but neither one of them really sees it. There's always food. He always knows what she wants to eat. That level of thoughtfulness to me is one of the sexiest things ever, because
I agree.
Feeding people is my love language. And so like I gave that to him because it's also what Savvy has. And so it's just one of those things where I'm just like, oh my God, if you show up here with something that's my favorite, I'm yours. I'm a puddle on the floor. And so he does that for her, and like her cat loves him more than Penny loves her. They have this great relationship, and he knows that she has a soft side. She refuses to admit it.
Mm.
And so Savvy and Joan, Maggie's best friends, they are both getting married, and Maggie has to find a date to their weddings. And she's upset about it because she's had a recent breakup. But Savvy quickly reminds her that when she had a breakup, Maggie forced her into something, and she had been in her relationship for years, and Maggie was not in the same situation. And so, begrudgingly, she goes on some dates that aren't great. That's an understatement. But they're not great. And randomly, she happens to meet a really handsome heart surgeon at the gym.
Mm.
And so they hit it off, and he's ticking a lot of her boxes. And as they prepare to go on a trip together, Garrett admits that he's had feelings for Maggie since they were in college. And now she's kind of thrown. She goes on the trip and is just like, what do I do?
Right.
I can't stop thinking about that. Do I have feelings for him? What is this? And she decides she wants to explore it, but she's not ready to let go of Blake because she's just not sure that she's willing to take the risk.
Right. There were like so many parts of that were exactly what my friendship was. Which is why I think it's all hit a lot harder, but also because I feel like there were a lot of things that were unspoken for, because I think when you're that intimate with somebody, not in a physical way, but in a mental way, there is something that is so special about that, especially when like your body has been sexualized, right, for so long, that when you meet somebody who loves you for your mind, and your connection is just that, it's like a whole other ball game. We love the friends to lovers trope.
We do. And the hard part is, right, like there can be so many things left unsaid because you're friends, and because when you're friends, silence can be comfortable. And oftentimes you already know where the bodies are buried. So there don't have to be a lot of questions.
Right.
And the longer that we are familiar with each other, the more I know your temperament and your expressions and how you'll react and what you might crave. And so there are things that I can anticipate as your friend, that, you know, if I'm just dating someone new, I'm having to learn all of that.
Right.
With a friend, I know it already.
Right.
And so there's this level of intimacy without intimacy. That I think is really beautiful. It can lead to greater heartache. And so, you know, like, that's why Maggie's so afraid of the risk, because she's like, if I lose him, if I choose not to date him, I might still lose him as a friend. But if I date him and lose him, I might lose him forever. And so, like, what do you do? And so it's funny, a lot of people jumped in my DMs after they read it because they were like, ma'am, she struggled too hard. Like, he was right there. She should have known. And I was like, no. But you have to understand.
It's so fucking real, though.
It's so hard to make that choice. And you have, like, a million people that you're using as a sounding board because you're like, well, what do I do? What do I do? I like, and everybody says something slightly different.
Right.
But, you know, you always have a couple of real ones that will say some stuff, and you're like, okay, wow, that was really deep. I don't know, I wasn't sure I was ready for you to say that. Thanks. But you're also kind of like, they're totally right. You know, and
I feel like you were one of those people for me when I when I learned about your book. I was like, wait, this sounds like something I'm going through. And I would argue that for everyone who was like, he was right there. I feel like when you have such a special friendship, the risk is so much harder. Like, it's like there's so much more at stake than just losing someone.
And you have to both be willing to risk it.
Right.
If one of you is and the other isn't, then you can't move forward. But sometimes it also means that even as friends, you can't move forward because there's things left unsaid, and you have to be willing to have a conversation.
Yeah.
And
if you can't have a conversation,
then you're just kind of in this really stagnant place. It's like being in limbo.
Yeah.
And it's hard in those moments because I think it tells you who you are as a friend, and it tells you who they are as a friend. Yeah. Because if you really are best friends and you really are in a place where you can talk about anything, and they've seen some of your hardest moments, then having this conversation shouldn't be so hard.
You know, that's exactly what my therapist said. Shout out to Candace. Candace, we love you.
Hey, Candace.
In this house. She was like, you've been in limbo for so long that you need to have this conversation. And obviously we are where we're at now, but I think Candace was very much like, when you have a friendship like this, at some point it's going to have to change one way or another. Because if you both decide that this is not for you, you cannot be this level of intimate with someone when you're looking for a romantic partner, because you're not allowing space for someone else to come into the picture. And so I think my holdup in even approaching the conversation was always that we're going to lose this regardless. I guess if we had decided to take it in a romantic way, maybe not, but maybe in the long run. Sure. And if we're just going to have the conversation, we need to set boundaries about what this intimacy is, because we are not allowing other people, whether we like consciously know it or not, there is no one that knew me or anything I was going through better than him. So how do I even make room to be that level of intimate with someone else if I'm putting all my cookies in your jar?
Right. And I think that's what, Maggie went through with her friends. They were like, well, if you're doing all this stuff with him, because she would upset Garrett because she would have something randomly scheduled on one of their Saturdays to go with Blake. And he's like, but this is our time. And he's like, you don't think that at some point, like, he's going to not want you to have these Saturdays with me? That was an issue for your last boyfriend. Right. And she's like, she was just gagged because she's like, I mean, he knows that this is a thing for me and my best friend. But, in your mind as you're reading, you're like, does he know your best friend is a man?
Right.
And so there's like all of these things where you're just kind of like, all right, there's dynamics to this, but if the conversation's being avoided and it's one of those things where it's like you want to have one and they don't, it almost feels like they've made a decision about the friendship. Yeah. And that's unfortunate, but it's not on you.
Right. And I think too, with my my marriage, I was with someone who couldn't voice their feelings. And again, for two people who were so like, we could be in a corner and talk about everything under the sun. For two people who can't be emotionally intelligent about this particular topic, I think says a lot. And it is what it is now. I think he probably hasn't even I don't think his brain has caught up with what was lost here. And it's unfortunate that that we were forced, like our hand was forced into this happening without even giving ourselves the opportunity to have an honest conversation. Because even if it was, what it kind of ended up being, someone that I am romantically involved with doesn't approve of our friendship, why wasn't that conversation had? And why did it take so long for you to even tell me that? Because we could have been having this conversation and we could have avoided all of this. And as your friend, while I will miss our intimacy, I also understand that that's someone you're trying to pursue romantically. I don't have as much space here anymore. And I have to fall back in a lot of ways. But to not even have that conversation, I think also puts the relationship or the friendship in like, okay, this is what the friendship really was and not what I thought it to be.
Right. Because I think there's those things where you have moments and it seems so easy and so natural to have conversations. It's like, why wouldn't we talk about this? Why wouldn't you tell me?
Right.
Because at some point it's like being led on.
Yeah.
And, and then kind of being shut out. And it's like, okay, so in my mind, we had a friendship.
Right.
Was I delusional the whole time?
Yeah.
Or were you in it?
Right.
And it, to me, signals that there probably was a feeling on the other side, but I sense fear. And in my mind, I'm like, I dealt with something a couple of years ago where someone who I'm friendly with, basically told me, like, we're in the same friend circle. I'm just not sure. And I was like, you won't be sure until you actually try. We're grown people.
Right.
We have the ability to be civil no matter what.
Right.
If it doesn't work out, again, we're in our 40s.
Yeah.
Quit playing with me.
Yeah.
And so, like, but that person was unwilling to try to move forward. We're still friends to this day. But the funny thing is, there's still a flirtation. There's still, like, this weird chemistry that I would love to get rid of. And honestly, but like, it's one of those things where you gotta own it and say things with your whole chest. And if you're not willing to speak on it and you're basically just gonna run away, like, you're a fucking coward. And, like, it says something that you would let fear dictate how you navigate something that was supposedly with your best friend.
Yeah.
That's really unfortunate.
Yeah, I agree. I think, I don't think I've ever put a man in such a, like, high, like, pedestal, as I had this person. Like, there was, and I think it was because I was so emotionally safe until I wasn't.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the fuck was that?
Yeah.
And also, was I delusional this whole time about what this friendship was? And I think for someone who has always struggled with, like, how valued am I in this relationship?
Yeah.
That opened up all of these insecurities that I had of, like, I thought we were this, but you're saying we were this. And if it wasn't because I have literal proof of what we were to each other, I would be even more destroyed, more of, like, in an insecure space of, like, I made this shit up in my head. And and that is unfortunate. It's unfortunate that it is where it is. Now we heal and we move on, and
it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard, though, right? Because someone who is your best friend, your close friend, even just a friend, right? Even if they weren't at that level, friends are, by nature, like, as you build trust with them, they are safe spaces. They are balms when you are hurting.
Yeah.
They are, folks that really help you navigate spaces that are difficult and painful at times. Losing that kind of a friend,
Right.
you're also losing that safe space.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that place where you can just be unapologetically yourself and be accepted without qualification.
Yeah.
And, be able to put down your armor. And, that's the part that honestly sometimes hurts more than everything else.
Yeah.
Because it's like, why did you let that happen?
Yeah.
If you didn't actually want the friendship.
Right.
Even.
Yeah.
Like, where are we that you would get to this place in this level of intimacy and then say, you know what? Nothing.
I'm good.
I'm ghost.
Yeah.
I'm gone.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think what has, especially in what I do every day, and this like armor that I do have every single day, I think that's something that's hurting the most. That this was like one person that like I didn't have to be Mel. I was Melissa fully, transparently as I come with nothing. And I think that's what hurt most. That you could say, because for everyone else I'm this person, but to you I am exactly who I show up to be, and for you to be like, I'm good, I'm falling back, without a conversation, without an I'm sorry, without that, I think that's gonna be hard to overcome.
You know, I think about the title, right? The Good Ones Are Taken. And I think about the dating pool. And I'm gonna say the dating pool is real ghetto. Y'all. Okay. Like it used to be a pool. Now it's like a bucket and someone peed in it.
Oh fuck.
And so like that's how it feels. I'm in my 40s, so it's a whole different situation than when I was in my 30s, and that was still rough.
Yeah.
But like dating and hoping to find someone that isn't just gonna be your partner, but is also gonna be your friend.
Yeah.
It's so hard to find. And it's so hard to find folks that timing is such an issue, especially when it comes to friends to lovers. Timing is often such a major part because one person is ready and one isn't. And the one that isn't, for whatever reason, has a hard time communicating. It's an understatement, right?
Her.
Yeah. But it's one of those things where it's like, you know, every relationship I've been in has been an issue of timing. And
I literally said this the other day. I don't know to who, but I was like, maybe I was on the podcast, and I was like, my life has felt like right person, wrong time forever. And like, I just need the timing to hit. God, please. If you hate me, just say that.
I literally, years later, almost every single one of my exes has been like, man, I shouldn't have let you go. And I'm like, well, it is what it is, bruh. Like, bye-bye.
Yeah.
But I also feel like I often am a training ground for that person's next. And that pisses me off so badly.
Isn't there a book like that I just read? Oh, Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez.
Okay.
Yeah, basically like the two main characters like have the same thing. Like everyone finds like they're happily ever after right after they break up with the person. Yeah. So that's you.
Yeah, it is. And it used to really frustrate me. But now I see it for what it is. And it's one of those things where up front, if I can tell our timing is not in sync, then even if you're like the right person, it's not going to work right now.
Yeah.
And so like sometimes it's about choosing yourself so that you are preserving yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. So instead of writing all of the things I would usually write on a text message or on a letter, I have chosen to start writing a book, which what you were saying earlier about like, don't go back and edit is literally killing me right now because I wrote like the first 3,000 words and then I was like, okay, but like, let me go back and tailor the letter again. And for me, it's going to be very much more of I don't know if I'll ever see the light of day, but it's more of a therapeutic, like, what we deserved, and what our relationship deserved, and I don't know, we'll see what life it takes.
I love that though. I am a huge proponent of writing through feelings. To me, that's the best way that I express myself. And so like if I'm going through something, I'm gonna write about it because I have to get it on paper. I have to make sense of it. And then I can learn from it and move forward. I like to make everything that I deal with a teachable moment because then I focus less on this is happening to me and more on how can I find solutions and how might this be something that I can share with someone else if they're going through it. you know, for your writing journey, I'm gonna be on you for that because I think it needs to see their light today. But also, you know, Savvy was my therapy before I ever sought therapy in real life, and getting to the end of that story and seeing it become something whole, it did something for me, and it helped me kind of accept some things that I hadn't yet accepted from 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's a matter of working through it. That's going to be painful at times. And there are going to be things in there and you're like, you know, that doesn't actually have to be in here. We can move that over to the side.
Yeah.
But there's also these moments where you're like, wait, my character did this. Why didn't I do that?
Right.
You know, and as you have those moments, like, it's going to be really healing for you. I'm really excited for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Tosh, it has been lovely having you on today. Where can people find you?
The easiest place would be, I have a newsletter on Substack. It's tajmccoy.substack.com. My website is tajmccoywrites.com. From there, you can hit all my social media. I'm these days mostly on Instagram and Threads, and that is The One Who Will.
Lovely. For all those listening, you can follow us, Romance Unleashed Pod, on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. I think those are all of the things. And Spotify and all of the listening platforms. What? Okay. Tune in for our next episode. Thank you for joining us.